Good afternoon and welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group, and today I'll be interviewing Becky Grossman. But first, we would like to run down the weekly news, specifically how government and regulations have changed over the last week, and we continue to adapt for COVID. First, I want to start with local news. The Select Board this week voted Bernard Green to remain their chair, and also added a new position, vice chair, which Heather Hamilton will serve the role of. And so that's really all there is for local news. For state news, we've got a couple of issues. Phase 3 began this past Monday. It rolls out in Boston this coming Monday. And the Phase 3 portion of our reopening of our reducing the restrictions on economic, social, cultural interaction allows folks to go to the gym, go work out, go to the movies, museums, outdoor performance venues, and pro sports without spectators. I think it feels too soon, but the governor, Charlie Baker, wants to push forward. I've got some real concerns, and I hope folks will continue to wear your masks. Be really good about it. It doesn't work if it's not covering your nose and your mouth. And continue to wash your hands and continue to keep that distancing. Try to avoid being indoors in public spaces when you can. Also, to remind you, the MBTA C line is down for the month of July. And they are ripping up almost all of the tracks to put down new tracks that are straighter. That will help reduce the rate of derailment with passengers aboard. The Green Line derails 4 times more frequently than all the other lines combined. And this will help that and improve safety. It will also improve speed and transit signal prioritization, a project I worked on with many others in Brookline over the years, has been deployed as well. And so when we open back up August 1st, you're going to find that the Green Line is more likely to get the green light. And this will help folks get downtown even faster. I may have mentioned it last week, but I want to emphasize it again. The voter bill was signed into law, and that was really important for the September 1st primary and November 3rd general elections. And to reiterate, you will be mailed a mail-in ballot application. You fill out that application, you put it back in the mail, you'll get a ballot. You can mail that ballot in. Of course, you can still vote on election day. But if you're like me and you want to reduce your physical interaction with others to try to keep this COVID-19 at bay, you're likely to choose mail-in ballot. And that's really all the updates this week. What we're going to do now is cut right over to a conversation with candidate for Congress in the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District, Becky Grossman. Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. My name is State Representative Tommy Vitolo. I'm filming for Brookline Interactive Group. And we've got a great guest today, Becky Grossman, City Councilor from Newton, who's another candidate in the congressional race for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. As you know, there are quite a few candidates, and we're really trying to take the time to get to know each one of them so that voters can make an informed choice. Becky, thank you for coming on the show today, taking the time. I know you're so busy. We're going to get right to it. Tell us about, birth to 2019. Tell us about the beginning of your life.
Well, Tommy, thank you so much for having me on today. So I was born in New Jersey, and my immediate family still lives there. I left home for college. I went to Cornell University and was an economics major. And after that, moved around a little bit, coming to the greater Boston area again for education. I was incredibly fortunate to earn my JD and MBA degrees at Harvard, went on to practice law, work in politics, and eventually my husband and I bought our home in Newton when I was pregnant with our older child, my daughter Madeline, who just turned 9. When I think about my childhood and some of the formative experiences, one of the particularly meaningful ones was when I was 9, my daughter's age currently. And the powers that be in our local community wanted to put an incinerator in our neighborhood. And my mom, who had never been politically active before, gathered together with neighbors and friends and said, there is no way we're letting anybody breathe in what that incinerator is putting out. They got organized, they fought back, and eventually they won. And she brought me along to some, protests and rallies, and I marched with a sign in my hand. And a newspaper reporter asked me, little girl, what are you doing here? And I was quoted my very first article in saying that I thought incinerators were dumb, stupid, and idiotic, and didn't belong anywhere. So that was my really lesson into what a passionate, committed group of citizens can do from the grassroots when you get organized and fight back. And then I've carried that with me into becoming a mom myself. I sort of rolling the clock forward to 2016, decided to run for Newton City Council. It was really just a few days after Donald Trump was elected. I think, like so many people, I looked around and thought, I want to do more. And what's that going to mean? For different people, that's meant different things. And for me, it was stepping up to run for office. I have loved my time as a Newton City Councilor. I'm fortunate to serve as the chair of our finance committee now. And I felt very strongly then, and even more strongly now, that if there was a time to step up and get in the fight, this is that moment.
So tell us a little more about that. You've got this sense of activism from an early age. You're currently active in Newton city politics, which I want to get back to in a minute. But heading down to Washington, D.C. and working on national politics is a bit bigger than an incinerator or a city. So tell us, what brings you to the decision that you want to be a congressperson? That's a big jump. We want to know about that.
Well, as much as I love being a Newton City Councilor, the job that I cherish most in my life is being a mom to my 2 young kids, Madeline, who, as I mentioned, is 9, and my son, Jack, is 6. And I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom, fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. And I wake up every day thinking about what the world is going to be like for them, for all of our kids, for the generations to come. When they're adults, and feeling that great desire to safeguard the future. Right now, out of 435 members of Congress, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-age children. I believe that if we had 100 or 250 moms of young kids in Congress, it would change the conversation in Washington completely, whether we're talking about tackling the climate emergency, taking on the NRA, and making sure that our kids at school and our communities are safe from gun violence, tackling the unconscionable cost of prescription drugs in this country. So that's what fuels me. And as I said about 2016, if there's ever a time to step up and get in the fight, it's now. I felt that way then. I feel even more passionately about that today.
So you mentioned Newton City Council, and I want to come back to that, if only briefly. Certainly, you've had all kinds of experiences in the last 4 years in a smaller but a legislative body. Tell us how those experiences give you strength or motivation or insight as to what you would be like as a congresswoman.
Well, I think the most important parallel is how the work that we do has a direct impact on the daily quality of life for our residents. And one way that I've really tried to connect with my constituents is in being very accessible. As a Newton City Councilor, I had made a pledge in my first term to have office hours in each of the 8 wards in Newton instead of just the neighborhood that I live in, because I thought it was really important to be inviting people from all parts of the city in to have conversations with me and to be able to sit down face to face and talk through issues. I've made a similar pledge in the congressional race. And to my knowledge, I'm the only candidate to do so, that I will have office hours in my first term in each of the 34 cities and towns if I am so fortunate as to be elected, which I think is particularly important in a district that is as varied as the 4th district is. And when we've got a crop of 9 candidates, 6 of whom come from Brookline, 2 from Newton, and 1 from Wellesley, really showing up in the entire district, especially in the southern part of the district, in the South Coast, in the gateway cities, and in communities that definitely face different challenges than we do in Newton and in Brookline. Another element of my work as a city councilor as chair of the finance committee, I think is going to be particularly relevant and helpful as a member of Congress, especially in understanding the interplay of funding between the federal, the state, and the local level, and how local communities really do rely on support from the federal government in being able to provide the services that really do impact quality of life. And finally, the focus that I've had on children, on climate change, and on transit-oriented development, which is something that I've been a focal advocate for in Newton. And there's not a single community that I have visited in the 4th district where the topic of affordability, affordable housing, transit infrastructure, and the ability to put those pieces together hasn't been front and center on people's minds.
Now, you and I both have a undergraduate background in economics, so I have no doubt you've thought about the economic impact of COVID, our self-inflicted physical and cultural and therefore economic distancing, and the ramifications that has in terms of what a recovery looks like, particularly when different parts of the country and indeed different parts of each state are seeing very different impacts as a result of the infection and the employment and economic results therein. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're thinking of in terms of economic policies to rebuild from the federal level?
Absolutely. I think that the first thing we need to be talking about, which isn't getting talked about enough right now, is childcare and how that picture is going to come together for working families. We have a situation where in this district that I seek to represent, there's a 5 times differential in annual median household income from the north to the south part of this district. We know before the current crisis that we're in, that lack of affordable childcare is something that is real, that affects inequality in this district, in this Commonwealth, and in this country, and is even more pronounced in the time that we're going through right now, especially as so many workers don't have the privilege of being able to do their work from home, from behind a computer screen or on the phone, but need to actually be out there. And if you're going to work every single day, whether it's as a nurse in a hospital, whether it's in the grocery stores, whether it's on a job site, you still have to figure out that childcare picture. And families are really struggling with that right now. It also is an issue that disproportionately affects communities of color. And if we're going to get serious about tackling the very real systemic racism in this country, we have to be looking at those underlying structures that fuel that inequality. So that's a big priority for me in rebuilding the economy, and particularly in the reality of how economic well-being has really been an issue that is different in different parts of this district in very real and meaningful ways.
I love the way you tie economic recovery with other clear policy interests of yours in terms of supporting families, and maybe there's a little bit of feminism in there. I don't want to throw it on you. That's for you to decide. and for the viewers to decide. I support it personally. I try to be as much of a feminist as I can be. But so this is about you. Tell us about some other priorities. Maybe they tie in with the economics. Maybe they don't. Hopefully, Congresswoman Grossman and the rest of Congress will get our economy on the right track in a year or two or three, but you might serve much longer than that. So tell us about some other priorities of yours.
So I think it actually ties in with what fuels me on the childcare issue, which is being a mom. And the priority that I want to talk about is gun violence prevention. As I told you earlier, have a kindergartner. His name is Jack, and he, in his first days of kindergarten, when I was taking him to school, I had to have a conversation that so many parents out there are having right now in what it would mean to find a quiet place to hide in his classroom or run in a zigzag pattern if a scary person with a gun showed up to his school. That is not a conversation that any parent should ever have to have with their child, or a fear that any child should have to live with going to school. And we also know how gun violence is tearing apart communities, and especially communities of color. That is why I want to go to Washington and take on the NRA, and why I believe passionately in getting the money out of politics. Because if we're going to get serious about tackling many of our top priorities, certainly gun violence, but it also goes for taking on big pharma and big oil in tackling the climate crisis and the unconscionable cost of prescription drugs in this country. We're going to have to get the money out of politics and tackle those corporate special interests that have been controlling our government for far too long.
You mentioned transportation earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned transit-oriented design and development in Newton. I've been sort of following it from Brookline, just sort of from afar, intrigued. And certainly it is an issue that matters to me. And as you said, it matters to folks up and down the district. Can you give us a little bit more of a feel of what your vision for policy that pushes us towards transit-oriented design, how that would work, and how it would be different from the north, the central, and the southern part of the district, which clearly have very different access to mass transit and to jobs. Tell us a little bit about that. Give us some meat on those bones.
Yeah, so, when I think about the biggest challenge facing the district, this is what comes top of mind for me. Thinking about inclusive economic prosperity, economic development, especially in the southern part of the district, public transit, climate change, affordability, and how all that comes together. I mentioned earlier the 5 times differential in annual median household income from the north to the south part of this district. So what does that mean? I think it means that we need far more investment that has to come from the federal government in rebuilding our public transportation and our infrastructure that connects folks to where the jobs are. Right now, coming out of this pandemic, we are going to need to put millions of people back to work. We've seen how the federal government can put resources in a very meaningful and significant way behind what it views as priorities. And as we're looking to put millions of people back to work, and we know that we need to be rebuilding our commuter rail, rebuilding all of the different train systems, as well as thinking about how we're going to prioritize bus lanes and bus transit, and even bike infrastructure, which I know is something you've worked on passionately and something that I've been vocal about in Newton as well. We can use the resources of the federal government in this moment to accomplish those goals, all the while tackling the climate emergency and building for the green energy future that we want. Now, in terms of the housing piece of it, the federal government can and must do far more in incentivizing the kinds of zoning reform, taking on the effects of redlining that still very much affect how housing has developed in this district, in this Commonwealth, and to be using incentives to support local governments who are willing to make change and move in the direction of adding different types of housing to their stock, as well as being really thoughtful and planning more concentrated development right around where these transit hubs are, so that people can live without having to rely on a car and sitting in 2 hours of traffic each way. If you're coming from the southern part of the district to your job in Boston, that's what people are doing right now. One other thing that I just want to point out as we're talking about the inclusive economic prosperity idea, I had made a commitment very early on in this race that if I'm so fortunate as to be elected, I'm going to have a member of my staff whose priority focus is economic development, especially in the southern part of the district. That also really means small business development, making sure that small business entrepreneurs who typically have had the hardest time accessing capital, and that includes minorities, women, veterans, and the disabled, have that access to capital as well as the training they need to get a business off the ground, to therefore be employing others and bringing vitality to their communities. And it also means getting serious about opportunities like Brayton Point, a defunct coal-fired power plant that stands poised to be a hub for the offshore wind industry and has the opportunity to establish not just Massachusetts, but this district as a leader in a clean energy future. Those are the kinds of tangible solutions that I think that our member of Congress needs to be fighting for and bringing over the goal line, and that I'm really committed to as the next member of Congress for the 4th District.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could, I will confess, I have not spent much time down in the southern part of the 4th District. My family goes down to New Bedford, and that's no longer in the district, right? It stops at Fall River. And I think that's true of many folks in the northern part of the district. We know it exists. Maybe we drive through once in a while, but I was hoping you could maybe share with us maybe one challenge that is fairly common throughout the district, and maybe one challenge that is maybe folks in the north don't really have any understanding about, that the south is facing, or vice versa.
Well, I would just say that I think that the pandemic right now has really shed a light on so much of the inequality that we've been talking about for a really long time, but is much more pronounced as families are really struggling with how they're going to pay their next rent check, how they are going to make sure that there's food on the table. I spent a Saturday morning recently at one of the food pantries in Attleboro, hearing about a family of 5 children who, the parents had lost their jobs, were embarrassed, to ask for help. And when food was delivered to them, discovered that they were down to, 1 box of crackers. That is real. And that is happening throughout this district. Families are really worried about where that roof over their head is going to come from and where that food on the table is going to come from. And I think that there's a lot more that we have to do as a federal government to make sure that we are taking care of people and getting them through this crisis, both from a healthcare and an economic perspective. I think one other difference, or not difference, but something that is really on cities and towns' minds right now, is the aid from the federal government and the state government to the extent that the state government is able to provide it, to help to fill the budget gaps that municipalities are facing. I know in Newton, we went through a really thoughtful process of how we were going to figure out what to cut out. And in other cities and towns through the district, there are far deeper cuts. In Newton, we made hard cuts, but we're in a fortunate enough position that we really didn't have to cut to the bone. In other municipalities, it means losing essential services and losing educational services. So I think that there are real places that the federal government needs to be stepping in and helping, and it's really been unconscionable to me to hear people like Mitch McConnell talk about how they think that, one stimulus check is somehow going to get people through this time. And I think we've got a lot more that we need to do.
I have a cynical hunch that as the Republican strongholds of the Southeast and parts of the Midwest and West get sick, suddenly folks like Republican Mitch McConnell will find it in his heart to send more money to folks who need it. Cynical, perhaps, but maybe if it works out that way, so be it. Becky, we've just got another minute or two. Last thoughts, last opportunities to make a plug. Tell us what we missed.
Well, I will just say that out of 435 members of Congress right now, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-age children. And I do believe that if we had 100 or 250 moms in Congress of young kids, it would change the conversation in Washington completely. And that if we're going to get serious about making progress on the issues that we care about, we need to be sending new and different types of people to Washington to do that work. I would love if folks would check out our website, beckygrossman.com. It also links to all of our social media channels, and would be so deeply honored to earn the vote of every viewer who's watching today. So thank you so much for the time and opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning, and really appreciate that.
Becky, thanks for joining me on Brookline Interactive Group today. And as you know, this interview will be available online, so folks can see it later. They can send it to their friends. Thanks again to everyone over at BIG. My name is State Representative Tommy Vitolo. I'm delighted to share guests like Becky Grossman with viewers. We had a great time. I hope you did too. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much.